Thank you very much for another very thought-provoking talk. We'll now move to discussion. I suggest we have a microphone here which the speakers can share among themselves. We have a roving microphone here for those of you who want to participate in the discussion. I suggest what we do is collect 3 or 4 questions to start with and see a kind of range, and then we can stimulate a discussion on that and then collect another few. So who would like to? If you could perhaps say who you are as well.
I'm Sławomir Sierakowski. Just to make sure I understood the point of Andrzej Szeptycki. Could you give us a concrete argument why we need Polish minister to negotiate along with the French and German minister the agreement with or between Russia and Ukraine? Because I mean, if there is no pragmatic argument behind it, then I'm afraid I heard some kind of a Polish paternalist voice that we really need Polish face in this geopolitical game, and if we don't see it, then we can blame Ukraine for neglecting Poland or something. For me, if it can be more efficient, the Normand format, I'm perfectly fine with no seeing Polish face. I mean, I don't need to see Polish faces all the time everywhere. And one question which is in the air maybe on just to each one of you or someone who will feel that can answer this question. But first, maybe just to help me, Sławko, who was the editor-in-chief of Kontynenty, the Russian Maximov, am I correct? Okay, so there was a moment, because I'm thinking about Russia. Of course, without Russia, the love between Ukrainians and Poles wouldn't be so strong. But actually, it was Russia, of course, who or that turned Poles on the road to this reconciliation. But I remember the moment, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, when Giedroyć wanted to create the first Russian issue of Kultura, and he directed to Maximov to cooperate, and then also the book about this, or the anthology of this Rozstrzelanie Renaissance, or you know what I'm talking about, of course. And then if I remember, Ukrainian intellectuals with whom Giedroyć already had been cooperated for a while were pretty angry on it. Am I correct? That Osadchuk and other Ukrainian intellectuals already cooperating with Giedroyć, they moved away. They took apart from Giedroyć. Am I correct? Could you elaborate about this moment? Because I mean, they didn't stop cooperation, but they were angry on Giedroyć. Actually, this is my question mark. Okay, maybe to Sławko or to one of the scholars. Maybe Frank Sisson will know more about it.
If we can take that, and if we pause,
thank you very much.
Because there's 2 questions there, and let's take a couple more, and then we can come back to the panel in general. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Łukasz Adamski. I have 2 questions. First to Karolina Wigura. What do you mean actually by reconciliation? Because for me, this term is quite unspecified, it's quite metaphysical. It requires that nations have common single wills, and members of nations are responsible, or at least co-responsible for all deeds committed by their forefathers. So what do you mean actually by reconciliations? Secondly, you mentioned patience as this driving force of reconciliations, so patience and interest. And what about values? third, just a short remarks. I think involved both in Polish-Russian and Polish-Ukrainian dialogues, and I know many people who are also involved in both kinds of dialogue, and many of them have no fear against Russia. They may feel disdain towards Russian state, disdain, but not fear. And then to Andrzej Szeptycki, a question about this law you mentioned about heroes of Ukraine fight for independence. How do you think, is the very fact that UPA, Ukrainian Insurgent Army, was recognized as a power fighting for independence of Ukraine a problem, or perhaps problem is that neglecting, opposing, not respecting this fight is qualified as unlawful deed. So perhaps this platform would be more eager to interpret. And in the end, I would like to also to concur this opinion about a Norman format. Poland is not in because Poland, first, it has several reasons, but positive side of this is that Poland does not take responsibility for probable failure of Minsk I and Minsk II. A second, France and Germany are mediators. Poland, due to all these facts and this Polish specificity we know, Polish engagement for Ukraine is, at least by Russian elites, not perceived as a good mediator. So therefore, I would say if Poland would be in, then perhaps even such ceasefire as this one which was reached in Minsk I might be not to achieve. Thank you.
Perhaps one more, and then we'll go to the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Anna Richards. My question relates to the European Union, and certainly at the time of Euromaidan and the beginning of that sort of movement, we saw a great sort of hope in the Ukrainian people that the European Union would be Ukraine's savior from Russia, and certainly membership of the EU was the primary foreign policy goal of Ukraine. But since then, we have seen a certain weakening in the European Union, thanks to, and of course, the threat of British and Greek exits, the Euro crisis. And my question would be, sort of two parts. Firstly, has that priority for Ukraine changed, and is perhaps is the Euroscepticism that has occurred in other parts of Europe, has that changed Ukraine's attitude to the EU as a sort of beacon of hope? And secondly, the recent election in Poland of Andrzej Duda, how is that likely to impact Polish relations with Ukraine, considering that Duda will most certainly be a somewhat more Eurosceptic leader for Poland in the coming months? Thank you very much.
Thank you. What I suggest is that we give every member of the panel a chance to respond to whichever aspect of those questions they want to. Don't feel you have to say something in response to every question, but pick what you feel you can contribute to. And we can take them in the same order as
Thank you. I will respond to the last two questions, because I believe I'm familiar with that. First of all, I believe the reliance of the EU on the part of Ukrainians is very exaggerated. Ukrainians are thinking pragmatically, and being on the Maidan and noticing that, observing many processes, I would say that European Union per se and Luxembourg per se was a target of the great skepticism, irony, and mockery. This already Maidan, especially during January and February, when the events are becoming very dramatic, if not tragic, so to say. To put differently, there was ongoing jokes in Ukraine, in Maidan, and there were targets. The first target was Yanukovych, the second target was Putin, and the third target was European Union. So actually I'm saying it's nothing new, that people, Ukrainians are not, to say that, naive, or saying stupid. They do perceive that the European Union is kind of the weak, is not willing really to help, and things like that, and they give way to their frustration in many ways. This is the fact. Given the fact, disregarding this fact, social service says that support for European integration in Ukraine has never been that strong as nowadays. If I'm not mistaken, the support is 52, which is maximum, historical maximum. It's not that high, but giving the numbers of the people who are not supporting that, they are very minor. So general balance is very, so to say, large. What I'm just trying to conclude it here that, how should I say, people see European Union as a viable solution, especially for a foreseeable future. They see it rather a symbol, specifically within the anti-Russian context, which Karolina Vigura has said, as a kind of alternative, so to say. And therefore, on the level of symbolism, yes, it works. On the level of pragmatic at its politics, it doesn't. But this might is my personal opinion. Secondly, the effect of Polish-Ukrainian relations, Duda relations. Most likely, there will be one and major, and there will be a revival of culture war over history. This is what Komorowski did. He tried to to play down to his best of his possibilities, not to, how should I say, not to activate the cultural, the historical, the war over historical memory, specifically on Volhynia. For what we know, before they expect, this is what will come. And this is probably some kind of the, how should I say, the limited information, but I know it for sure. The last week, Ukrainian and there has been a meeting of Ukrainian and Polish members of parliaments, of Ukrainian Polish parliament. And the Polish part, basically peace, has left roundtable discussion in a protest against the historical laws. And I believe this is what already is coming. We have to be prepared. But my opinion is, and probably my hope, that yes, we are facing probably a very strong, ugly culture war over the history, but my hope is that very much like we're talking about European Union, it would affect that much Polish-Ukrainian relations, because basically they're not very much focused about all around historical memory. So I'll probably stop that, but if this comes probably later about historical memory, I'll answer that in details.
Just to comment the talks in Minsk and further agreements and the format of those discussions. I remember that once Ambassador Deszczyca said it's not up to Ukraine, but it's up to Russia, who wishes to discuss these questions with traditional. With two major European powers with traditional pro-Russian attitude, and Russia wants to have as much comfortable circumstances as it's only possible. That's why Minsk, and this is the main reason. I think more or less it's true. It's not up to Ukraine. However, we can talk about we can discuss if it's right for Ukraine to being a part of such discussions. As I agree to some extent, they are more or less fruitless, and except legitimizing of Russia's policy towards Russia's aggression towards Ukraine and some illegal armed groups created by Russia. There is a question what does it practically mean? So I think this is the answer, and it's generally up to Russia, not to Ukraine. And of course, we do not know official, maybe not official, but the real will of Polish government of being a part of such negotiations, because it really may be perceived as justifying some concessions, and I think this is the point. And the second comment, I'm sorry, because it's your topic, reconciliation. I'm not an expert, and and I do not desire it personally, but the answer for your question, I think that if you are a Polish nationalist, or if you are a man who was suffered, or your ancestors were were heard during the massacres in Volhynia, it might be something like Ukrainian Willy Brandt kneeling before the monument of the victims of Volhynian massacre in Warsaw and apologizing. So maybe something like this, symbolically, of course.
Thank you. First, about the Norman format and Poland-Ukraine. I mean, these are a little bit two separate issues. One question is how Ukraine sees its relations with Poland and Germany, and a little bit a separate question is how we see, from the Polish point of view, our participation in Normandy format. I use this example, but it is not the only one, and maybe not the best one. I can agree here. I could use as well the example of Poroshenko coming to Poland the first time only in December, I think, 2014. I could use, but this is also a Polish point of view, replacing of the Szczytna by Klimkin, which might be interpreted as, still such feeling, and this is pretty sure, did exist in Poland during the second half of the year 2014, that if the first part of 2014 was for Polish-Ukrainian relations was very good, then in the second part, something started to go wrong because of the problems of on the Polish side, Tusk being replaced by Kopacz, Poland becoming a little bit fatigued already by the war in Ukraine, but also on the Ukrainian side. And now the second question is, do we really need to be in the Norman format? And here I can agree. I mean, there are 2 points of view, at least. One point of view is that if we are to specialize in the Eastern issues, if we are to be Poland, the main EU expert on the East, we need to be in. And the second point of view is that if the Normandy format doesn't work, it's better for Polish interest not to be in. Frankly speaking, I don't have a clear, personally, a clear point of view on which option is better. Second question from Łukasz Adamski about the law on UPA. I think that from the Polish point of view, because this was, as I understand, the question was about how Poles see this law, or generally, or how I see it. Both. Okay. I think that for Poles, it doesn't matter. I mean, even if it was the law only on the recognition of UPA as fighters, even without all the details, even without the fact that Komorowski was on the same day in Ukraine, it would be also very negatively received in Poland. As for me, the second aspect you've mentioned, this is slightly a problem. If you come to a historical policy, when you say in details what you are allowed to do and to write and what you are not, what you are not allowed. But I think that the main problem with Polish-Ukrainian discussion on history is that Poland tends very much to impose on Ukrainians its own, to deny the Ukrainian historical discourse and to impose Polish one. We can accept anything. I mean, Yanukovych, revolutions, whatever. Only if Ukrainians come to recognize our point of view on UPA and Volhynia. Simplifying a little bit. And the third point about Duda, I think that, once again, we can diverge on history, Poland and Ukraine, but the good point is that even if we diverge on history, this, at least in the past, this has not fundamentally influenced our political relations. In that sense, like in the relations between Hungary and its neighbors, for example. And this is a good point. if you look at the year 2013, we had the very, let's say, unfriendly commemorations of Volhynia. And 4 months later, you had dozens of Poles, politicians, NGO activists going to Maidan. And for 2 or 3 months, nobody in Poland noted that you had red and black flags of UPA in Kiev on Maidan. Which a little bit shows some paradoxes of Polish approach towards Ukraine, but this is a good point this time. And I think, in fact, the crucial point about Duda is not historical problems, which may appear, but this is a question of the main orientations of his foreign policy, including the EU. Because if Polish-EU relations were to considerably deteriorate, I'm not saying this will happen. I'm saying this may happen. This will considerably weaken also our Eastern policy. Because we will have a lesser influence in Brussels, and this way we will be also less efficient and less attractive and for Ukraine.
Thank you very much for the questions. The first answer to Łukasz Adamski. What is reconciliation? This is such a broad question. We could spend here another panel, so I don't want to answer this question, but I will answer a more narrow question, which is, what is political reconciliation? Political reconciliation, in my view, is a political institution in which uses, to some extent, the ethics of individuals that are rooted basically in religious traditions like Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. A modern type of morality connected with forgiveness would be psychological one. I don't want to go into details. So basically, the values are taken into the politics, but the political institution of modern forgiveness that has been created in Europe after 1945, this is also important because, of course, in the past centuries, we also had some Caesars of Germany going to Canossa, but we don't mean that. After 1945, there was a certain institution which was built by some great politicians, like, for example, Willy Brandt, Konrad Adenauer, Charles de Gaulle, but also the Polish bishops that wrote the famous letter to the German bishops in 1965. The institution is based on 4 premises. One is collective responsibility of a nation for past deeds. The second is moral representation of a politician or another moral authority that is speaking in its name. Third is continuity of a nation. So repentance or forgiveness is declared not only by our generation, but also by all generations. And fourth, certain festivity or a certain special, unusual language that goes out of the politics. It is very often religious language. Having said this, I come to the second question about passions and interests and values. Politics is not only about values. It is about values, but it's also about passions and interests. And without looking at the constellation together, like Montesquieu did, for example, I do believe we cannot understand politics, and we cannot understand political forgiveness as such. So implementing passions into understanding of politics is, I believe, a quite rare way of looking at politics. Only few scholars nowadays do that. For example, there is this great scholar in France, Pirasner, but there are more. And I do believe it enables us to say something more and deeper about the nature of politics and about the descriptive and not only about the normative sphere of politics. And I would just like to mention the question about Andrzej Duda. I do believe we don't know yet. Basing on the query of the Polish periodicals I have been talking about, 2013, 2014, I would say there is no difference between rightist and leftist and centrist thinking intellectuals, politicians and journalists in Poland. But now, after the presidential election and after the campaign in which Duda has presented himself on one hand as a pupil of Lech Kaczyński, who we very well know had really, he treated very seriously reconciliation, for example, between Poland and Ukraine, even though I think that he wasn't very successful, but he did care about it. So on one side there is Duda, on the other side there is this interview that on one side there is Kaczynski, and on the other hand there is this huge article, the huge interview that Andrzej Duda gave to Rzeczpospolita a couple of weeks ago, when he doesn't even mention Ukraine. There is no Ukraine in this very long interview. And during the campaign also he presented himself as a person who doesn't really understand what reconciliation in politics is about. He was speaking about Jedwabne and not about Polish-Ukrainian reconciliation, but he presented himself as a person who really doesn't understand what this is about. So we really don't know. We really don't know. Basically, a couple of months ago, there was a visit of Viktor Orban in Poland, and Jarosław Kaczyński was boasting that he refused to meet Viktor Orban because of Viktor Orban's pro-Russian line. Viktor Orban demented later. He said he never asked for a meeting, but nevertheless, the Polish right, the Law and Justice, was presenting itself as very anti-Russian. But with this new president, we really are not sure. What is, I think, more important here is that Polish Eastern policy has been decapitated already before by the currently ruling government. Once Radosław Sikorski was not there anymore, I think the Eastern policy, pro-Ukrainian one, was already decapitated. So what can be worse? Perhaps a pro-Russian curse. This could be worse, but we really don't know.
Thank you. I think we've got time for another round of questions. Could I ask you to keep them reasonably brief so that they're questions rather than statements, and then we can go back to the panel.
Hi, Woli Krasnodębska. I'm a PhD student here. I wanted to ask more about reconciliation, and I wanted maybe to challenge this idea whether talking or not talking about history is really the key, or whether making new historical memories is maybe more important, such as in the case of the Maidan. And relating to that, maybe if talking about Polish-Ukrainian history isn't just talking about the things that divided them, but also some things that united them. So for instance, just a brief story, when I was in Ukraine, the ambassador who I had the chance to interview, the Polish ambassador, told me how they had problems building this memorial for communist victims, because initially Ukrainians felt that it was something against them, and only then with time they were basically convinced that actually no, it's a memorial for both Polish and Ukrainian victims in near Kiev. So there's also a way of Ukrainians actually accessing their history through kind of talking with Poland about that.
Okay. Can we get the micro? Yes, Frank.
Various models of reconciliation, the relative degree to which the two societies recognize guilt or weight of a guilt. I think with German-Polish relations and reconciliation, when this went on, overwhelmingly the German side was willing to take on itself the idea that it primarily was guilty. The Polish bishops make a statement. How deeply that ever went in Polish society, I don't know. It would be interesting to have statistics on how Poles feel about the driving out of the Germans from the Western territories, but I don't think it registers very high in Polish consciousness. Clear way in which, but practically for the Polish side, it was useful. when you move towards groups where the two sides are both convinced that the other is primarily guilty, does that not, in some long-term historical, not the specific issues of each discussion, is it not more difficult then to bring about this reconciliation or the process thereof?
Other questions?
Very brief question. Several people mentioned that when we deal with Poland and Ukraine, we are dealing with very much asymmetrical situation. The two countries had a different startup in the late 1980s, early 1990s, and there were many other differences. The question is, first, what is this difference? How to read this difference in context of decision-making, political decision-making in Poland and Ukraine? And second, does this asymmetrical situation imply that we actually cannot trace parallels between Poland and Ukraine and help these two countries think about one another? Thank you.
Final question? No? All done? Last chance? Sold. So we come back to the panel and for summaries, answers to these questions, and indeed to address any points which your colleagues on the panel might have made that you want to come back to. Let's take them in the same order again.
Well, just one comment. Traditionally, I think it's hard to imagine the pro-Russian course of future Polish government unless we have Paweł Kukiz or Janusz Korwin-Mikke as the head of our government, which is fortunately unlikely to happen. But when it comes to Prawo i Sprawiedliwość, which is law and justice, the most likely winner of the parliamentary elections, there are different contradictory signals from different sides, from different factions, in different periods from the side of this party. For instance, there was a situation 1 week ago when a group of Ukrainian members of parliament came to Poland, and there was a format of something like interparliamentary working group or interparliamentary assembly between Ukraine and Poland in Warsaw, and members of Polish parliament from Prawo i Sprawiedliwość refused even to meet with their Ukrainian colleagues because they demanded from them to be apologized because of the war massacres in Volhynia. And then when Ukrainians refused, Prawo i Sprawiedliwość refused to take part in these meetings. So we really do not know what the situation will be after the elections.
Thank you. Two short remarks on reconciliation. I think the problem is that we have this German of reconciliation with Germany, which was successful because Germans were willing to recognize the responsibility for the Second World War, Holocaust, and so on. And that's how we came a little bit to believe it is possible with other countries. The problem is that, generally speaking, other countries, Ukraine, Russia, whatever, Poland, don't want to recognize their historical responsibility for anything, for hardly anything, and that's why it doesn't work in the Polish-Ukrainian context. Another thing, which is also worth to be noted, is that it seems to me there is a slight difference in Polish approach towards historical responsibility and reconciliation with Russia and with Ukraine. In that sense, that even if we disagree with Russia on history, which is quite understandable, we don't ask Russians, or we don't publicly criticize Russians for recognizing and simplifying Red Army and NKVD as national heroes. I mean, we respect, in a way, Russia's right for having their own historical heroes, even if we don't like that. And in case of Ukraine, we are much more demanding. Same apply to differences between Katyn massacre and Volhynia massacre and so on. I will not go into details. About asymmetry, I'm not sure if I have fully understood the question, but the point is that with the asymmetry, with these very asymmetrical relations between Poland and Ukraine, of course, we are able to cooperate. But still, this cooperation will remain subject to controversies and to some critical remarks, like in case of Western European countries and their former colonies in North Africa, or like in the case of, well, let's say US and Mexico. I mean, US and Mexico are partners, are neighbors, but still I'm not sure if Mexicans are very happy about the relations with US and if US are very happy with the relations with Mexico because of the immigration. So I suppose we would like our mutual relations to go beyond that stage. And the problem is that it seems for the moment, at least for me, quite difficult.
Thank you. As for the reconciliation, Andrzej, no. I completely disagree. I mean, we don't demand from Russia because we don't feel we have partners in Russia. We demand from Ukraine because we do feel there are partners there we can speak about reconciliation with. And we mustn't also forget that reconciliation is a process. Germans in the 60s, in the 1960s, before the Ostpolitik of Willy Brandt, were completely reluctant to say that they were guilty towards the Poles. And you could see it very clearly in the reaction to the Polish bishop's letter. The letter was extremely reluctant, and it came as a great disappointment for the Poles. Also, when Willy Brandt kneeled at the monument of Ghetto Uprising in Warsaw, the German society reaction was very negative. If you see the statistics, they were completely shocked by this gesture, and only within decades, the letter of Polish bishops in Poland, which was, by the way, also very negatively perceived by the Polish society, to say after 20 years after the war, we ask for forgiveness to Germans? For what? So only after decades, the letter has become a symbol of the Polish-German reconciliation, and the kneeling of Willy Brandt has also become a symbol of the new German state ratio. So this is one. Now, there were two questions about. One was about history and how history is important, and the second one was about asymmetrical guilt. They are great questions. I do believe that there is some window of opportunity for forgiving between the people who were actually hurt by the war or any other atrocities. And this window closes after some years, or perhaps with the death of one generation. The next generations, I think, can only reconcile in the meaning of throwing a bridge across the burden of the past. So perhaps history is not as important as mutual knowledge. So if Ivan and Pavel drink beer together and they know much about their countries, but not necessarily about history, this is already a good reconciliation for me. This is already a normality, and this is a great success. Now, about asymmetrical guilt. Perhaps the most important thing about the politics of reconciliation in post-war Europe is that, firstly in Germany, but then also in other countries, and surely in Poland, a kind of a culture that was critical of its deeds in the past emerged. So not only Germany today is able to say we were guilty of this and that, but also, for example, Poles, as early as in the 80s, started to write much more on the Ukrainian-Polish relations and about the Jewish-Polish relations. And they were able more and more and more to be critical towards our past. So reconciliation is not about asymmetry, I think. And it's not about saying that some evil was bigger than another evil. It's more about being critical towards oneself. I don't know whether this answers your question.
Thank you very much, which brings us to the end of the session. Just two things. First of all, to thank all of you for your questions and participating, but also to ask you to join me in thanking the panel for such an excellent and stimulating start.